The next thing that we're going to talk about with our ecosystem ecology is something called productivity. And productivity, there are two different kinds of primary productivity. You have what's called gross primary productivity, and then you have net primary productivity. So, gross primary productivity is when you look at all of the plants of the area and how much photosynthesis and how much energy they are able to absorb from the sun. Net primary productivity is you take the plants and their productivity, but then also what do they store in excess that then could be used for aerobic respiration. So primary productivity can vary based on a lot of different things. For example, seasons. We live in the United States, and specifically, we're in what we call the temperate forest biome, which we have the four seasons. So, if I ask you a simple question, which we should be able to answer, what season do you think our ecosystem is most productive? Hopefully, we would say summer. What is our least productive season? Winter. So, not only is that a factor, but also habitat. So if I asked you, what do you think is more productive, a temperate forest or a desert? Hopefully, we would say a temperate forest. And then the reason why this all links together, when we talked about biotic and abiotic factors, is that the more harsh the environment, the less plants there are. The less plants there are, that means that you have lower primary productivity. So to kind of give a visual, instead of just talking about this, if we look at this map, where we see that the dark purple and gray is least productive, and then the oranges and the yellows and the greens are productive, we can see that this can change over the seasons. So if we think about, okay, in the northern temperate forest, that's where we live in North America, we see that the photosynthetic biomass goes up in the spring and then it dips, especially during November and December. The tropical photosynthetic biomass, it stays pretty steady because they don't necessarily have those seasons. And then in the polar regions, it has a very short but very productive summer, and those are the photosynthetic ranges that can happen. So if we look at these a little bit more visual or a blown up version of them, we see that these can change based on seasons, and it also can be changed based on what hemisphere you live in. It can change based on where you are in location to the ocean. So there's a whole bunch of abiotic factors that can influence the productivity of an area. So one of the big things that we had talked about earlier is that energy flows and is lost where nutrients cycle. So there was a study that was done in Silver Springs in Florida where they looked at the number of primary producers and then they looked at some of those top level consumers. And so hopefully it makes good sense to us that the most that we have in an area are those plants. We have a lot of different species of plants on planet Earth. We don't have a lot of those top predators, although they are kind of what we think of as the most famous. Number wise, there's not a ton of them. And so we get that energy pyramid, it's called, and that flow of energy. And in your sophomore year, we said that, okay, about 10% of that energy is passed from one trophic level to the next. Now that we're in CLEP biology, we can say that about 6 to 16% is passed on to the next level. That number can vary because we can look at, all right, how long does that creature live? How much does that creature eat? And those factors will influence how much they will then pass on to that next trophic level. So when we look at the total amount of energy that can be put into a system, that's called the energy input. And it's measured here in kilocalories. That's a big unit there. And we see that producers only take up about 1.2% of the energy that the sun gives off. The rest of it is just lost either as heat or something else. But what we could say here is, well, plants aren't very good at taking the energy in from the sun. Yeah, but at least they do. All the other things rely on taking in some type of food in order to get their energy. As we look at the trophic levels thereafter, we see these energy conversions. So we're looking at kind of this 20,000 number. and then it gets reduced as that number goes from one trophic level to the next. And we see that not a lot of that energy is able to be used, but it is enough for us to have food chains and food webs. If we were able to harness more of that energy, if producers were, we would have a lot more animals on Earth. We'd have a lot more top predators on Earth. But plants do what they can, and they are the ones that provide us to everything, or provide energy to everything else above them on the ecosystem food chain or food web. So in the end, it's all lost as heat, and we know that because we, as warm-blooded creatures, we trap that heat. But even cold-blooded creatures, even though they don't trap it as well, they are still giving off heat. Everything on Earth is not 100% energy efficient. We can even feel that with like the heat of an engine of a car after it's been running. We, as living creatures, we give off heat because we are literally burning fuel, not diesel or unleaded or anything like that, but we're burning food fuel and giving off heat in that regard. So, as we continue, the big phrase again is that energy flows, but now let's talk about how nutrients cycle. So we talked a little bit about this in your earlier biologies, but we dive into it more, obviously being in advanced biology, in what we call biogeochemical cycles. Bio, life, geo, land, chemical, that makes good sense. Uh, and what we want to know here is that these things never die. Water never dies, but it can change where it's found in. Carbon never dies, but it can be found in living and non living things. So, something kind of unique to think about. The water that's in your water bottle, or let's say you have a cup of water, that was probably underground a day ago. It also might have been in a cloud a month ago. It might have been in the ocean 4 months ago. And it might have been in a different cloud a year ago. But what's cool is that water never lives, it never dies. It can be found in living things, non living things. And so, what we call these major things is we call them nutrient reservoirs. And where a lot of the chemicals, whether water, carbon, are stored. And so, we're going to learn about three of them. We're going to learn about the water cycle, the nitrogen and carbon cycle, and those are what we call hydrological and atmosphere. And then we have those that are mainly found in rocks. Those are the phosphorus and sulfur cycles. So one that we obviously have as the most important of life, because all living things need water, is the hydrologic cycle. And so some keywords here would be words like evaporation, condensation, um, infiltration, runoff, those types of things. But one of the big factors I want you to know about this is that water naturally can be purified. If I have a puddle that has just regular water, and then I have a puddle that is made out of salt water, does the salt evaporate into the air? The answer is no. So, one way that water is naturally purified is that it evaporates. It's only water that is going up into the air, also known as evaporation. It's going from a liquid to a gas. Another way that water is purified is infiltration. So when I said that, the water that you're drinking today might have been underground 3 days ago, that's because a lot of towns will pump their water through a well. It will go through a little bit of a treatment, sent through the pipes, and then maybe eventually to your house. So water, when it falls, it might go to the ground, be absorbed by plant. It might be absorbed through the soil. But when there's a lot of water, it will go through the soil. It will then go through bedrock. And one of the huge reservoirs of water that we don't see is what we call groundwater, which is where a lot of humans get their waters from, what we call aquifers. So on Earth, water in some places is readily available. In Minnesota and the United States, we don't have much troubles with this. But in some areas like Africa, where there's just not a lot of water because there's not a lot of rain, or there's not a lot of rivers, or there's not a lot of lakes, it can be scarce. And in other places where we try to make places that aren't supposed to have a lot of water into places that do have a lot of water, It requires a lot in order to make that happen. But in, for example, southwestern United States, they are ideal growing areas for a lot of our crops. And so irrigation, like what you're seeing here, is used to harvest a lot of things like lettuce, a lot of things like raspberries and strawberries, because it's warm there, but not necessarily providing the same water that we would see in areas that are like forested. So they require a lot of water to make that irrigation and make that type of farming take place. So places where water is readily available would be areas where there is a lot of lakes and rivers and the like. We see in southwestern United States, places like Texas, they don't have a lot of groundwater that's available. Sometimes they have troubles with that. You think about, well, Hawaii, what's their deal? Well, they're right by the ocean, and so the water that they pump is going to be salty, so they have to go through a desalinization process, which is super expensive for that to happen. Right? So other places or other types of cycles, we have the carbon cycle. Carbon can exist in atmospheric form in like CO2, but also there are huge reservoirs of carbon not only in the atmosphere, but also in the rocks. Specifically, the fossil fuels that we harvest, fossils are just that. They're made out of old remains of creatures. Carbon is one of the big notch, NOCH, C is one of the big elements of life. And so when we look at the carbon cycle, big reservoirs include the fossil fuels, but also in dead organisms, CO2. So one of the things that we are struggling with right now is the amount of CO2 that's in our atmosphere, because we are burning those fossils, those old organisms, and we're using them for fuel. The reason why they are fuel is because, well, they're leftover creatures. There's still carbon that's in them. And so there's what we call the marine part of the carbon cycle. So limestone has a lot of old creatures left in them, shells and bones and other fragments of stuff. But limestone can't be burned for fuel because there's not enough carbon in there. Other natural reservoirs on land would be creatures that are dead themselves, but the carbon that's stored in trees or creatures that live for a long time. And then we talked about the combustion of things like fossil fuels. So carbon, a lot of it's in the atmosphere and also in living things, and there's also can be removed naturally by plants, and that's why it's so important that we have trees and we try to reduce deforestation. Nitrogen. One of the weird things about nitrogen is it's made out of 77 to 78% of our atmosphere, but we can't breathe it in. If we're low on nitrogen, we can't just take a big gulp of air and get our nitrogen. Instead, we have to have things do what's called fix it, put it into tissues that we can then consume and get our nitrogen that way. So there's what we call nitrogen fixers. What we know best, being in a rural area, are legumes. So things like alfalfa, things like soybeans that are able to take in nitrogen from the atmosphere and then put it into tissues, and then we either eat the legumes themselves or we can also eat the things that ate the legumes. So we naturally get nitrogen by eating protein as well. So that's a way that nitrogen, even though it's very, very prevalent in the atmosphere, we can't take it in. Planets like Uranus and Neptune, that's why they're blue. Earth, that's why it's blue. It's because nitrogen actually is going to reflect and refract blue colors of lights. So lastly, let's talk about two other ones, the phosphorus cycle, and that is something that we use as fertilizer. So we will actually harvest rock, we'll break it down into small chunks, and then we can apply it to fields as fertilizer. It's just another example of a mineral that can be found in living things. Specifically, phosphorus is found in our DNA. It's what the phosphate group is, sugar base and phosphate group. And so there again, phosphorus, it doesn't live, it doesn't die. It's just found in a lot of different things, and so that's why it's part of the biogeochemical cycles. So those are some of our different types of cycles. Kind of the new ones would be the phosphorus cycle that we hadn't learned about before, but it is one of our main elements of life. If it wasn't Notch, it would be like Notch with a P at the end. And then sulfur, very similar to phosphorus, can also be found in a lot of our rocks, but we only need that in trace amounts. So that concludes our part 2 of ecosystem ecology. Hope you learned a lot, and we'll talk to you soon.